The Battle for Salvonia by Stephen U. Allen. Chapter 3. The training hall within Masvier Citadel was not just a place for clashing swords, but it was also a center of learning overlooking Brenwell below it. The main window allowed Casney and Gertrude to gaze upon the bustling merchant region near the port of Masvier and out towards the Caruvian Sea. During the daytime, the land warms more quickly than the ocean waters, causing a sea breeze that carried the moist sea air towards the window and into the room. It was always pleasant to experience this before noon. The smell of freshly baked bread from Hollysword's bakery could sometimes be smelled even from this distance, or maybe it was just Gertrude's imagination. Either way, she loved Brenwell and her people dearly, which is why she wanted to become the best warrior and stateswoman that she could be. This meant having a proper education before she reached her 25th anniar. "I'm heading out there when my weapons training is finished," Casney said, while looking out towards the waters. "I'm so sick of living in Brenwell. I know the secrets of both the sea and distant lands await to be discovered. First chance I get after my training is done, I'm boarding a vessel and exploring Laurone or perhaps even Oulefance." "Careful, Cass," Gertrude replied. "There are worse places than Brenwell. A lot worse. Trust me. I once spent an entire month in Parsacumi. Talk about barbarism." "You see, that's exactly what I'm talking about, Trudy. I envy you for having even been to the island of Parsacumi. Where have I been? To the west coast of Salvonia for a few days with my father, so he could train some admiral on the use of daggers in close combat. I wanted to stay longer, but we always have to hurry back to this exciting place. Always something interesting happening in Brenwell." Detecting her sarcasm, Gertrude replied with some words of wisdom. "My own father always says that boredom is a good thing, Casney. Boredom means no one is trying to kill you." Casney rolls her eyes and sighs with frustration. "I'd almost welcome someone or something trying to kill me at this point. This coming from a woman that can't even defeat her best friend in combat. During training, you beat Altruist twice, poor guy, but you've never been able to come even close to defeating Wilhelm or myself. Don't be so anxious to get out there, Cass. From what my father has told me, it's pretty cutthroat." "I understand this, but—" "Do you?" Gertrude asked. "My sister spoke much like you are speaking now. She desired adventure and challenges that she couldn't find here at home. Stories of sea creatures attacking Parsacumi took her there first. When she found no danger on that island, she departed for Laurone." "When did you last hear from her?" Casney asked. "I've received one message from her via Restune Crystal about getting work at some keep in central Laurone. That was over 7 months ago. I'm sure she's fine. She was always very resourceful. And strong. Maybe she's still alive. Maybe she's dead. Perhaps she's trapped in some dungeon by Yakvon himself, being forced to consume rodents and bugs and drink whatever rainwater happens to trickle down through the barred window." "Why must you always imagine the worst, Gertrude? I'm sure Mildred is just fine. She's probably too busy cooking for her new husband, or she may be with child." "No. She would have told me if any of those things were true. She'd have found a way. Somehow. I thought you two hated each other. Are you sure she would reach out to tell you about the more favorable aspects of her new life?" "We don't hate each other. We just didn't want the same thing for our mother when she fell ill. Father partially blamed Mildred for her death, but she was inexperienced. It wasn't her fault, really. The illness just took my mother away over time. If Mildred really didn't care, she wouldn't have reached out at all. No, if she had gotten married, she would have told me by now." "Good point, I guess. I wish I had an older sister sometimes," Casney said. "Hey, I'm as good as any sister by blood could be, Cass." She nudged the much shorter Casney on the shoulder. "But I hope you see my overall point, though. She's gone from my life. My older sister left me and left her kingdom For what? Because she hated my father and couldn't find satisfaction within her own homeland? Well, I certainly don't hate my father, Casney replied. Okay, pups. Sir Kirk Heppelton began to call his 4 students back to their studies. Your reprieve is over. Let us resume our analysis of the battle at Lysandra. Okay. I take it back, maybe I do hate him just a little bit, Casney said. Gertrude laughs as they return to their seats at the discussion table. The training center was adorned with shields and weapons representing many generations of the Lodenmore family. Most of the weapons were Kedias, which were sometimes referred to as morning stars. Each handle of the Kedia displayed the symbol of the Lodenmore family and was attached to a chain and ball, which was sometimes spiked. There were also swords, axes, spears, and even fist weapons. But the Kedia dominated the training walls as it was the Lodenmore weapon of choice. 4 students and their instructor sat down at the wooden table, which was covered with both parchment and paper maps, drawn by strategists and thalavars over the past decades. Compasses, charcoal sticks, chalk, and ink pens were also scattered before them, as were portraits of various leaders of Salvonia's past military units, both successful and routed. I hope you enjoyed your little respite, pups. Let us resume our work. Altruis, provide a summary of the battle and explain what went well. Altruis, the youngest of the group and one of 2 males, finished stuffing a Winterbury muffin into his mouth quickly, as food was not permitted at the discussion table. Well, we're waiting, Kirk said. Okay. So, the counterattack at Lysandra took place over 35 anniars ago during the war between Salvonia and Varkolzunia, which was fighting a war on 2 fronts, and one of its main fleets was deployed to the shores of Lysandra. Admiral Mordizan of Salvonia saw an opportunity to land a force of 1948 Marines onto the southern shores of our enemy and capture the city in one great swoop and thus end the war. Correct, so far, Kirk replied. He then turned to Wilhelm, who was staring at Gertrude from across the table. Wilhelm. Yes, sir, Wilhelm responded. The battle at Lysandra. What went well initially? Wilhelm paused for a moment to consider the question. Admiral Mordizan's forces were able to quickly overwhelm the sparse defenses of the Varkolzunia coastline. Salvonian Marines were armed with well-crafted swords, axes, and shields, but they also bombarded the coastline with cannon fire to eliminate resistance to their landing forces by Lysandran infantry. General Orthrokny of Lysandra had not anticipated such an audacious move by Mordizan and was almost completely unprepared for the attack. He probably lost over 1,000 men during the assault. Heppelton then turns to Casney. So why then was the only invasion of Lysandra by Salvonian forces not a success? Casney hated how her father always asked her the toughest questions in front of the rest of his students. Admiral Mordizan's forces failed to mass at the decisive point quickly enough to destroy the enemy's ability to resist from fortified positions. Casney replied. Go on. Heppelton began to circle the table to observe his pupil's level of attention while a fellow student spoke. It was common for trainees to daydream of food, games, sleep, and, of course, sex. Keeping them focused was sometimes a challenge. Casney sighed while wondering if a more thorough explanation would satisfy the demanding maestro. Mordizan's fleet quickly ran out of Lefledust, so their ship's cannon fire could no longer provide support. Further, his men were cut off from the rest of the Salvonian fleet and could not be adequately supplied with rations or fresh water. Communication with the largest part of the Varkolzunian fleet to the south was not destroyed, and a reinforcing contingent of Varkolzunian marines prevented any means of escape by sea. Very good, Casney. If only your skills with the spear were as impressive as your knowledge of military strategy. I'm trying my best with that weapon, sir. If you would just let me use a sword instead, I would be. Be quiet, please. Our analysis is not quite finished. We still haven't heard from the princess yet. Gertrude tried her best to stifle her anger by closing her eyes and biting her bottom lip. Please, sir, with respect, I again request that you not call me this. I'm not officially a princess. I'm not even in the direct line. We've all seen how the king treats you, Gertrude, Wilhelm commented. You might as well be his actual daughter. He is my granduncle, and I admire him both as a beloved relative and my king. But he is not my father. I have a father, remember? Gertrude asked. And where is your father now, then? He isn't here, is he? Wilhelm asked. Wilhelm, watch your tone. We are all to be respectful to each other here, Heppelton warned. Wilhelm continued. I'm only pointing out that out of everyone here, only one of us has not seen his or her father in weeks. Your bond with the king is therefore more of a father-daughter relationship than it otherwise would be. Only one of us here gets whatever she wants and full-time protection wherever she goes, Wilhelm said. And you think I enjoy this? Gertrude snapped back and rose from her chair. Despite being female, Gertrude was about equal in height with her own father, which made her taller than most men, including the young Wilhelm. I'm doing this training just like you all. I can never go anywhere without being watched. If I accidentally slip and fall, no less than 3 men run over to help me up. I have people tasting my food, washing my clothes, grooming and feeding my horse. I can't even bathe alone because at least 2 guards and 3 female bathers are always with me. And you say this as if it's a bad thing? Altruis asked jokingly. Gertrude continued. This is the only place where I am treated almost like a person that can take care of herself and not like some fragile glass ornament. This training room is the only place where I have true friends. At least, I thought you all were my friends. She looks Willem in the eye. Rather than redirect the conversation at this point, Heppelton decided to allow it. He understood that these kinds of interactions sometimes fostered unit cohesion. Allowing his pupils to express themselves without restriction brought them closer together and allowed trust to develop between them. In some ways, these interactions were more important than weapons training or history lessons could ever be. We are your friends, Gertrude, Kastny replied. Wilhelm is just being an ass, and we all know why. What's that supposed to mean? Wilhelm asked. We all know you're still grieving Naomi. I'm so sorry, Wilhelm, but taking it out on one of us isn't right. Gertrude sat back down in her chair after being reminded of Naomi's death. Wilhelm's sister had also left Salvonia years earlier in hopes of starting a new life on Laurone. Her ashes had been delivered by a Golzunkris only months earlier. Given the high cost of paying a Golzunkris to safely deliver the remains of a person across the Caruvian Sea, it had been concluded that she died while in service of her countrymen as a Kalnorai. Her armor and weapons, along with her ashes, were also safely delivered to Willem and his parents within an urn made of nearly pure xylite. No one was sure exactly how she lived, but it was clear that her death was perceived as being an honorable one by someone very wealthy in Laurone. I'm sorry too, Wilhelm. Gertrude finally began to understand the source of his anger. His sister was never afforded such protection, and even though this had been Naomi's choice, Willem probably envied Gertrude for being so well protected, while his own sibling was not. Gertrude also reminded him so much of Naomi, as they were nearly the same age and had the same hair color. It's okay. Thank you both for your kind words. I'm just happy that we were able to receive her remains and put her to rest here, where all Salvonians belong. Her spirit now resides with the gods, Willem, Heppelton added. I remember when she was also in this very room and sat at this table much like you are now. In truth, I am glad that she left for Laurone when she did. With respect, sir, how can you say that? Willem asked. Naomi was quite adventurous in spirit, as was Mildred. I could only teach them so much here. At a certain point, the training room must be abandoned to experience the real world and apply what you've learned. For those two, the desire came much sooner than I had hoped, but I knew that I couldn't prevent them from leaving any more than their parents could have. They lived freely, and despite her death, I'm glad Naomi was able to live the way she wanted to. Willem nodded in approval. Now, Gertrude, daughter of King Betvan's nephew, finished the analysis for us. What more is there to say? She asked. What happened after the invasion of Varkelzunia? Gertrude preferred combat training, but she understood that a good Thalavar learns from the mistakes of the past, so she continued. Mordizan was ultimately defeated by the reinforcing contingent recalled by Ochtrokni. His marines were slaughtered or imprisoned. Many of them were tortured to obtain information about Salvonia's own coastline defenses, which prompted my grandfather to... We don't need to know your connection to the players here, Miss Lodenmore. Just continue with the analysis, please. Sorry, sir. The previous king, Voronik Lodenmore, ordered General Relucrus to reorganize the coastline defenses and prepare for a counterattack by Varkelzunia. Describe the defenses if you don't mind, please, Lady Gertrude. King Voronik was so convinced that the Varkelzunians were planning to pour all of their resources into their invasion of the coastline just east of Brenwell that he ordered a recall of all Salvonian vessels to defend that beach. Heppelton walked towards the window and looked outside as she spoke. The others had not yet been conceived at the time of the battle, but a much younger Curak Heppelton was actually on the beaches of Brenwell during the invasion itself. He looked down out the window below and recalled a time when the tide was crimson and the air was filled with the stench of entrails and rotting flesh. Cannons firing throughout the day were so loud that not even the drums of Riku himself could drown them out. Body parts would fly in many directions as man after man stepped onto a mine and was sent to the heavens, not in one piece, but in several. He often wondered how he had not gone mad after hearing the screams of his fallen comrades and feeling the shower of blood across his youthful face as he sliced through Varkelzunian men and women determined to plant their flag upon the beach that day. Perhaps it was the promise of a better future that allowed him to continue living without losing his mind to the paranoia often associated with military service. He was trying to be a part of this future by teaching the finest men and women the kingdom had produced, including the king's own bloodline. Continue, please, Miss Lodenmore, Heppel instructed. Gertrude finished her analysis. Relucrus organized a defense against the Varkelzunian invaders by using a series of layered defenses including barbed wire, covered pits with beds of wooden spikes, and simple Leffel dust mines covered with sand. The Salvonian economy was also shifted to mass-produce these items as well as cannons aimed towards the Caruvian Sea. King Voronik was aware of the two-front war Varkelzunia was waging. Their first war with Laurone led to the diversion of forces to the far east. All Salvonia had to do was win the war by attrition. Very good, Gertrude. And how did the war end for the Varkelzunians? Sir Altruis? Continue, if you would. Altruis cleared his throat and sat up, thinking that this was an opportunity to impress Casni. The king's intuition was quite accurate. Nearly 50 Varkelzunian vessels sailed for the coast of Salvonia and attacked Old Brenwell. However, Varkelzunia took heavy losses while trying to invade. Salvonia had and still does possess longer-range cannons, which prevented the enemy reaching the shoreline without taking significant damage to their vessels. Many ships never made it to land at all, and men making it to shore were blown to pieces by cannon fire or mines. Some fell into the pits and only suffered debilitating injuries. Others were cut down by Salvonian soldiers from Division 142, but ultimately Varkolzunia surrendered after the loss. A peace treaty was reached, the Treaty of Keruvia. This war is often referred to as the Great Defiance by Salvonia citizens. The war had lasted for nearly 2 years, with Salvonia emerging as a major naval power and center of science within Ereshmar. Excellent, sir, Altruis. Now, finally. He circled the table as if to ponder who to call upon, but Casney already knew who her father was going to pick next. There are some important lessons to be learned from this particular war, she said. Taking the initiative before Sir Heppleston could ask a question she did not know the answer to. "And what are these lessons, young warrior?" he asked. To begin with, Modizan should have quickly destroyed every Restune crystal within a 5 ebonth radius to eliminate communications between Lysandra and any reinforcing naval vessel. He should have also killed any carrier birds that might have flown out to deliver messages to nearby forts or vessels. Go on. Further, it was a mistake for Varkolzunia to engage in a war on 2 fronts in the first place. They should have continued their war with Laurone until victory was reached and then consolidated their resources while honoring the tenuous peace that already existed between Brenwell and Lysandra, the capital cities of Salvonia and Varkolzunia, respectively. Once a foothold had been established in Shorelane, Laurone, and perhaps as south as Kerrimore, the invasion of the Salvonian coast could take place. "Very deceptive, Casney," Wilhelm commented. "It's almost scary how cunning you are." "An impressive analysis, young Heppleston," Kerr added. "Any other lessons to be learned from this, Gertrude, or would you consider our analysis complete?" Gertrude thought about his question for a moment. She flipped through the old maps of Salvonia and skimmed through the notes of the participating military Thalavars, and several points came to mind before she spoke. "Well, if we are being thorough, I'd like to add that the Varkolzunians were ill-prepared for close combat." Heppleston finds this comment peculiar. "Explain further, Lodenmore." "The Varkolzunians should have never poured all of their forces onto one beach which was targeted by an enemy with superior cannon fire. What are some alternatives from a tactical point of view and not so strategic as young Casney has already provided? They should have approached Salvonia from multiple directions and landed troops here." She pointed to places on the parchment map laid out on the table. "And here to the far west even. These beaches were not so heavily defended back then. Thousands of troops from Lysandra could have landed and grouped up just east of Lake Clovis here to the west of Brenwell and launched an attack from 2 sides." "A sound tactic. Anything else to add, young one?" Heppleston asked. "Well, the Varkolzunian must not have been very good at fighting in close combat. As their Thalavar, I would have insisted on proper weapons training with sword and shield." "Just with sword and shield? Why not any other weapons?" he asked, while scratching his stubble. "Is it not easiest to craft and apply a sword in battle, sir?" she inquired. "Easy, perhaps, but not always efficient, nor always desirable. A well-trained warrior can use a sword to defeat any opponent, sir. Were I in charge of the Varkolzunian forces, I would have ordered all shields to be made of xylite. Each footman would have been trained in the use of the sword by practicing every day for 3 hours. I would have inspected them all myself to ensure preparedness." "All by yourself?" Heppleston asked. "Are you sure this is the most efficient training method, young one?" "Perhaps I would delegate it to my second-in-command, Vice Admiral Casney Heppleston," Gertrude said, with a smile at her friend. "I would at least be present while the training is taking place to inspire my warriors." "And how do you inspire your people, Lodenmore?" by using the same weapon that any simpleton can use, or do you demonstrate your ultimate mastery of all melee weapons by employing the Kedia? The, the Morning Star? She asked. Heppelton silently nodded. I mean, no disrespect, sir, but it's an awfully clumsy weapon, which is probably why no one ever uses it in battle. Your ancestors used it. The Kedia was, in fact, the weapon of choice for the Lodenmore family. Legends speak of a time when your great-grandmother, Lisolnua, single-handedly defeated a Gretchuan from the island of Ulefons over 100 years ago, making her the only person ever to fight one of the creatures and live to tell about it. Gertrude sighed and tried not to display disrespect. That story may well be true, sir, but we are talking about fighting men and not monsters. I can do just fine with swords. Why learn how to use a clumsy tool, such as the Kedia? It might be the only weapon that you have available. Did you ever consider this? It might be a weapon that your opponent has no experience defending against. Have you thought of the tactical advantage this would provide you with? Your blade might not be able to pierce multi-folded xylite armor, but a concussive blow to an unpadded helmet from a charge, Kedia can bring down even a well-armored combatant. A complete warrior should know how to use all weapons. I respectfully disagree, sir. The probability that I will ever have to fight someone using such a weapon is minuscule at best. I disagree with you, young Gertrude. Kirk stopped circling the table and walked over to the wall furthest from the room to retrieve a Kedia. I'd say the chances of you fighting someone with a Kedia is high. Very high, in fact. The students all looked over at Gertrude and searched her expression for signs of fear or apprehension. Casney in particular knew that her father believed the best teacher was experience itself, and not mere words. Go to any of the walls within the room and retrieve your weapon of choice, he commanded. Gertrude hesitated. She had not planned on training with weapons this day, as it was not on the schedule for any of the students within the hall. Do it now, young Gertrude. This is an order from your instructor and Thalavar. Gertrude rose again from her chair, but in truth, she wasn't worried about losing a fight against such an old man. She was more worried about hurting Sir Heppelton in front of his daughter. She quickly walked over to the wall near the training room's entrance and retrieved 2 iron swords. These blades had dull edges and could not inflict a fatal wound. However, the weight of the training blade was the same as a sharpened weapon and provided a similar grip. Everyone, to the training circle! Expedite! Heppelton commanded. Miss Lodenmore, don your armor and meet me in the center. I shall wait. You aren't going to wear any armor, sir? She asked. I doubt I'll need it. If you hit me even once, I promise to quit my role as mentor and primary trainer of the Brenwell elite and take up selling fruit near the shoreline instead. Must we do this, sir? I really don't. Don your armor now or leave this room, Gertrude. Those are your choices. And if you leave, do not return. He stared into her eyes to enforce the seriousness of his intentions to ban her from training. She still had her doubts about Heppelton's ability to fight at the age of 67 anniars. However, she had no choice but to do as commanded. The remaining students stood up and quickly formed a triangle around the circular training area, which was several meters away from the study table. The circle was made of limestone, but was intentionally stained with red, as it was the only region in the room authorized for weapon use. Heppelton chooses the Kedia with a rusty iron shield bearing the emblem of his own ancient family house, which had been thriving in Salvonia for thousands of years. This particular Kedia was not very impressive. It too showed the signs of weathering and had an unspiked ball at the end of the chain. The handle was about arm's length and was also made of iron. Heppelton removes his instructional robe to reveal only his shirt and trousers. The floor was cold upon his feet, but he preferred to fight her barefoot and with as little armor as possible. After ensuring that every inch of her body was covered in plate armor, Gertrude entered the combat circle and assumed her standard defensive stance with 2 blades. She had been training with swords for several months, and the motions necessary to parry, block, thrust, and swing were practically second nature. Hitting a target with her blade's edge was as easy as breathing at this point. "I've bested every student that has ever tried to defeat me, sir, and these were young men and, of course, one young woman." She gestures to Kasni. "I admire you for your knowledge of military strategy, Erishmar history, ancient Parsecomian philosophy, and melee combat theory. But you are just too slow and, well, old, sir. If I get even the slightest hint that you are not trying your best to injure me, young Gertrude, I swear to Kenru himself that I will speak directly to your grand uncle and have you assigned to another master. Perhaps tailoring would better suit you. It is a profession for the more fragile of Brenwell's citizens, after all." Gertrude closes her helmet visor and takes a deep breath. Each of the swords was about the length of her arm and had similar masses. She sought to put a swift end to the demonstration by mildly wounding his right shoulder with a light swing, but the blunt blade only found air. "I don't feel as if you're putting your best effort into this, young one. You'll have to move more quickly. Wound me if you can. Last chance to give it your all. I can tell if you are holding back." Gertrude swung her blade at his chest, but each attack was parried or dodged. Her swipe to his knees was blocked with the handle of the Cadia, which surprised Gertrude and the other students. They had never thought to use the handle itself as a defensive tool. Gertrude began to sweat as she chased the old man from one side of the ring to the other with her failed attacks, and then something frightening had occurred to her. Heppelton had not yet even tried to counterattack. His action had only been defensive, which suggested that he had not wanted to demonstrate his own best fighting skills. What was he waiting for? "It would seem you're beginning to understand the shortcomings of the short swords," he said with a smile. "A young warrior such as yourself should be much faster than an old man, right? Hit me for Kenru's sake." Gertrude raised both swords and swung them downward as hard as she could at Heppelton's unarmored shoulders, but the scoundrel somehow managed to extend the chain on his weapon to intercept both blades simultaneously. "I can't tell you how many times I've seen this maneuver used in battle. It is the technique of a desperate combatant, for sure, young princess." Using the weight of the extended chain and ball, Heppelton encircled both blades and pulled them downward to the stone floor, leaving a disarmed Gertrude standing in the center of the training area. Rather than attack, he stood back and motioned for the young lady to retrieve her weapons. "We haven't got all day. Iodva is nearing her journey's end across the heavens. But I warn you, do not pick the blade back up unless you truly believe you can defeat me." He was an old man, and she had been training for months, swimming in Lake Clovis, running up and down Sertuanth Hill with armor, swinging swords, fencing with Alertius, Wilhelm, and Kasni. Surely I can outlast a man more than 3 times my age. It's time to stop holding back. I know I can do this, she thought to herself. Gertrude retrieved her training swords, and without even pausing to rest, she launched a flurry of incessant strikes at Sir Heppelton with the hopes of inducing fatigue. Each swing, however, failed to connect and was either deflected or dodged. The old warrior finally realized that she was truly giving it her all and decided to counterattack against an opponent who was intent on hurting him if he did not fight back. He charged his Kedia with a single swing and launched the ball at Gertrude's left hand. The connection was forceful and accurate enough to remove the sword from her hand, but she still held another. You telegraph your swing with your footwork postures, Gertrude. Learn to conceal your swings by posturing your body as if you're preparing to defend just before you attack. With her one sword left, she switched her stance so that her left shoulder faced him, which would be the stance of a person preparing to shield herself from an attack. She then spun her body in an attempt to strike his right shoulder, but felt a sudden and intense pain in her own shoulder as soon as she completed her turn. Gertrude dropped her remaining weapon and fell to her knees in submission. Though her armor protected her fragile flesh, the hard strike from the fast-moving ball of the Kedia inflicted mild injury upon her. Her breathing was hard, and she could feel the sweat beginning to soak the cloth just beneath her armor. "You had the right idea, Caritzi, but your spin is too slow," he commented. "Listen to my words very carefully, everyone. There is truly only one type of discipline, perfect discipline. A leader of warriors should know how to use all known weapons well. Had you defeated me with your weapons of choice, it would have been proof that your devotion to combat proficiency is enough to develop the fine Thalavar that I know you could become someday. However, it is clear that you require significantly more training with your family's preferred weapon." "I understand, sir," Gertrude replied. "I don't think you do, Lodenmore, but I do believe that one day understanding will find its way to you. To your feet, young one." Gertrude sighs and stands at attention, the way she was taught to when speaking to a superior Thalavar. "Are you going to speak to the king about removing me from your tutelage?" she asks. "Now, why would I do that? You did try your best to injure me, I could tell. Underestimating your opponent will get you killed on the battlefield, Gertrude. Never hold back when fighting any opponent. Defeat the weak and show mercy only after the ability to deliver a mortal wound is removed. Defeat the strong and kill your opponent quickly. This isn't a hobby for some princess. This is a place for defenders of Salvonia. The day will come when you have to use your weapon to end someone's journey on Ereshmar. The feeling after a kill will overwhelm you at first, but this experience is inevitable for one who has chosen the path of the sword, or in your case, the path of the Kedia. I do not believe it is fair to force me to use such a weapon, sir. I can be just as deadly if I... You will carry the Kedia with you wherever you go until I rescind the order." "Excuse me?" Gertrude's mouth widened in shock, and her stance became more aggressive in the proximity of her teacher. "I don't remember giving you permission to address me with that tone, Lodenmore." Heppelton barked back at her, and her stance once again stiffened. "Remain silent and listen. The Kedia will never leave your side. Unless bathing, it will be always with you. If you are observed by anyone holding a sword or any other weapon while in Brenwell, I will refuse to train you any further, and you can find a new weapons master. Further, you are to perform no less than 50 swings using the wooden practice opponent every day on each arm and practice your chain, wrapping techniques 20 times a day on its legs. Do you understand my directions?" "I do, sir." "Good. Now, have you decided on a name for your Kedia and shield?" "Not yet, sir, but once I choose a Kedia to wield, I shall name it accordingly." "Why wait to name it?" Heppelton asked. "You can name it right now in front of us all." Heppelton walks over to the far wall and grabs a small Kedia and shield. They are both old and display signs of wear and mild rusting. "These tools will serve you well on the field of battle, Lodenmore." Gertrude reaches out and grabs the Kedia with her right and the shield with her left. What were you expecting? A shining silver-covered chain that sparkled in Iodva's blessing whenever you swung it? He asked. This particular Kedia belonged to your grandfather Veronic when he was but a young warrior. It has been used to defend our walls from raiders, pirates of the Cheruvian Sea, and monstrosities likely from Olifants determined to destroy our way of life. It bears the symbol of the Taraku, she commented. Ah, you noticed that? Graceful creatures with power and mystery. I believe he chose his display wisely. These tools may not be pretty, but there is history within these weapons that I believe will inspire you to train just as hard as your family members before you did. I shall name the Kedia Lyrule, Gertrude said. It was my pet Thraklov's name when I was a child. He was so aggressive when hunting for mice or smaller birds, but gentle whenever he was with me. And the shield? I haven't thought of anything yet, but I will. Let me know the name before the weapon is used in battle. It is a tradition that your trainer also connects with the weapon his student uses to train with. These tools of violence are characters in a play. We name them and treat them as we would people who protect us from harm and have important roles in our life stories. Heppelton now turns to the other students and dismisses them so that he can speak with Gertrude alone. Casney smiles at her friend, who must remain behind. I know it seems like I am being hard on you, Gertrude, but should you fall in battle, it could very well be the end of your family's bloodline. You must be prepared to do everything and anything to survive what awaits you out there. He gestures to the window. You know, I knew your mother personally before she died. As you know, she was a student of my own father when he was weapons master. Was he as hard on her as you are on me? Heppelton chuckles. I sincerely doubt it.